Hello, Andrew Kolsky with Stop My OCD and anxietyenders.com with another version of our podcast. Today, we are going to be talking to Jenny Matthews. Jenny is a therapist who works in this area, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to introduce herself. So, Jenny, take it away.
Thanks. Yes, I'm Jenny Matthews. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Although I don't do a lot of marriage counseling, or actually any for that matter. I specialize in treating anxiety disorders and OCD. So people who often identify as overthinkers or might avoid things that they're anxious about. Specialize primarily in working with people who have emetophobia or fear of flying or OCD are the top areas that I work with.
Fantastic. And I'm so glad to be talking to you because you and I have a very similar type of practice. So it's always interesting to learn from others, your experiences with this. But first, let me ask you, you use the word emetophobia, and that can be a big and scary and unknown word for a lot of people. Can you tell us what is that?
Yeah, of course. So emetophobia is ultimately the fear of vomiting, and that can sometimes be looked at in a couple different ways. So somebody who might have the fear of vomiting themselves, or there are some people who struggle primarily with the fear of seeing somebody else getting sick. They're not necessarily concerned about themselves getting sick, but seeing it. And most people would be like, yeah, nobody likes to vomit. So, what the heck? But the people who experience emetophobia really feel a constant worry about it in their day-to-day life. And they are altered, the decisions that they make, what they eat, where they go. Sometimes people, women will even hesitate getting pregnant, having children because of, potential for morning sickness or seeing kids throw up. And so can have a really big impact on people's lives and really restrict them. So that's the short version what emetophobia is.
Great. Well, thank you for explaining that. And we're going to get into the long version in a little bit because it's something I'd love to hear more about because I think it's something that there's not a lot of good information out there about it.
Totally.
But before we dive into some of these other areas deeper, let's learn a little bit more about you. What got you into treating these types of patients in the first place?
Yeah. So, when I went to school to become a therapist, I, went in different settings to get practice, and I'll just never forget one of my experiences was helping a adolescent girl who was struggling with agoraphobia. She was really hesitant to be away from her home for the fear of having a panic attack. And I had never experienced that before in my career. I was a generalist and I was brand new out of graduate school. So I did what most good therapists will do. I found a book on like a manualized process of how to do it. And I walked her through it and she got better and got better quickly. And it was the first time I really felt like I got to see a transformation in a client and in a short amount of time. And it was so exciting to me that I was like, I want to do more of this exposure work. And that was, of course, the step-by-step process I was using with her. So I got really interested in that. And I was like, how can I get more training on this? So I'm not just, trying to figure it out in a book on my own. So I did research, and the only thing I could find at the time was the BTTI training that's offered through the International OCD Foundation. I was like, all right, that's where I'm going to go do some exposure training. And of course, with that, I learned all about OCD, how to treat it. And so sure enough, as I open up my practice saying I do exposure therapy, I'm working with all kinds of people, but lots with OCD, but also other anxiety disorders as well because of that.
Wow, that's great. So you mentioned a couple things in there that I want to follow up with. So the first thing is, let me make sure I understood. So you were an intern at the time that you first did this?
No, I think I was not an intern. I had completed my graduate program, my internship, but I was still under supervision at that time. So I wasn't fully independently licensed at that point.
Right. Okay. Got it. And so anyone who watches my podcast is going to know that I'm going to ask this question because I ask it of everybody who I speak to who is a therapist, and I always get the same answer. So I'm curious to see what your answer is going to be. When you were in school, did you learn anything at all about OCD or exposure therapy as a student?
Not one time. I had to seek that out.
That's the answer. So far, we're 100%. It's
Unfortunate,
yeah,
but true. Hmm.
yeah. It's one of those things that, there's a lot of things that are required curriculum for people who are in a master's program learning to do counseling. Unfortunately, OCD is not one of them, and
Right.
therefore I have not come across anybody, with the exception of one person who was not a master's student, but a doctoral student, who
Hmm.
took her degree at a place that treated OCD, so she learned about it. But other than that, there I haven't come across anybody. So um,
Hmm.
and that's one of the reasons that I do this podcast, because it's so important to share information with people about, when you're seeking help. If you have OCD, you have to find people who have some training. Not that other
Hmm.
therapists are bad therapists, but if they
Right.
don't have training, they're just not going to be aware of how to manage it. So far, like I said, not a single person has ever said to me that they learned about it in school.
Correct. Yes.
So okay, so you work with this first patient, you start getting training, you learn about this field, and obviously there's something about it that you connect with.
Hmm.
And so from that point, has this been your primary focus, or have you done other types of therapy as well?
Yeah, it's definitely evolved, but I would say it's certainly the primary focus. Doing exposure work, was kind of my first lead in, because I wanted to help people face their fears and the things they were avoiding, to really help open up their life and expand it so they could have more freedom and ability to be more present with the people in their lives, and not feel like they're living in such a small world. Uh, but of course, as I, got more training, I started learning about other really great treatments that are evidence-based, that offer people more options, which has been really exciting, because exposure therapy is really hard, and uh, people get better. And I have continued to see that. And yet there are people who don't, and people who really struggle with that approach, or they did really well with exposure therapy, but they maybe need like something else to kind of help propel them with a little bit that's remaining. And so other therapies that I incorporate are acceptance and commitment therapy, which the acronym is ACT, and another cognitive therapy that's called ICBT, inference-based cognitive therapy, which is a cognitive therapy specifically for OCD. And that's been newer for me in the last, I would say year and a half going on, that I've been doing that. And it's interesting. I'm finding I'm doing almost a little bit more of that than exposure. A lot of people are really interested in trying the non-exposure therapy first, which I don't blame them for. Uh, it sounds scary to people to go face their fears. So
Yeah, yeah. No, it's that's really interesting, because you and I had a chance to talk before we started doing this recording, and I was sharing with you that I pretty much do the same thing as you do in terms of incorporating all three of those therapies. Um, I find that each one has a unique benefit that really stands out, and because
yeah.
every patient is different, some of them react stronger to certain things than others, and I do some videos on the YouTube channel here, where I explain kind of how the different treatments fit within the OCD process in particular, and where they focus their attention and how they're designed to work. So, um, you know, as you say, the last year and a half or so, you've been doing the ICVT. Um, yeah, it's been around for a while, but it really hasn't been known. And now
Right.
getting
Right.
critical mass where people are learning about it.
Yes, there's a lot of traction that's been gained in the community, widespread, and people are really excited about it. You're just hearing more and more about it, and I love that there's more trainings on it. When I first started learning about it, there wasn't even trainings on it. I was like, okay, I can grab this book and try to help myself, but nobody was even teaching it yet. I shouldn't say nobody, but like not on like a typical scale of a therapist that you can just sign up for any training. It was really small scale. So it's been really cool to see it evolve rapidly in the last year.
Yeah, and it's a really insightful way of approaching OCD, and it's great that it's out there. Um,
Yeah.
so so can we dig a little bit deeper into some of these areas now in terms of like starting with emetophobia? So
Yeah.
if someone is watching this video and they're kind of hearing what you're saying and they're thinking, that kind of sounds like my situation. Can you give us a little bit deeper? Like what would they experience? How would it come about? What would it look like for somebody?
Yeah. So a lot of the people that I talk to uh, noticed this fear as a small child. There's not too many that have experienced that, it kind of came on out of the blue or, later in life. It's something that I'm not even really sure why, but it starts in childhood. So that a lot of the stories that I hear, not that this is everybody's experience, but, being in class as a kid and there was somebody who threw up in class and that just being a huge moment of panic for them and really set the stage for them going forward and then really being afraid. So, I see a lot of avoidance in, those kind of situations. So people might avoid being around anybody who's sick. They might avoid um, even seeing shows or anything on the media where people are sick. They'll even limit their food or check food really constantly to make sure. They might even limit themselves to safe foods, like if they go to restaurants or to families' houses, or even at home, checking expiration dates. Um, Again, not in just a typical manner, but every single time and with a lot of kind of urgency and obsessiveness.
Hmm.
So that's a lot of kind of what it looks like. There's the constant worry, of, especially this time of year, it's November right now that we're meeting, and neurovirus is kind of common right now. There's a big spread in my community, and it's worrying people with emetophobia. Feel like they are doomed when they hear these stories. They become convinced it's going to hit them. They're not going to be able to handle it, and it's their worst nightmare. They're living hell. And so it can really take a lot of different shapes. I mean, people can have emetophobia all kind of on their own, but it can also, be intertwined with OCD too. So, um, you know, restricting eating is a huge piece, and unfortunately people can develop eating disorders out of it, not out of, you know because of body image concerns and wanting to be thinner, but because their eating has become so limited out of fear of getting sick that they then restrict their eating.
Yeah. Wow. I'm listening to you describe that sort of generic emetophobia patient, and I'm thinking to myself, I have that patient that I'm working with right now. I mean, almost check mark for what you were saying. Norovirus concerns started as a kid, afraid of vomiting, everything that you just said. So it's really interesting to see how that is so sort of standardized across the board. Um, which begs the question then, if they've been dealing with this since they were young, what causes people, in your experience, to finally come and seek therapy?
Mhm. Well, I've worked with small kids who have it. A lot of the times, the parents, of course, are wanting that, and sometimes even the kids. That they're, especially because at school, it is unfortunately something that they'll encounter at times, is seeing kids get sick or hearing kids talk about sick. So it can become really hard for kids to go to school. So that will often motivate either the parent or the child to seek additional help at that time, because it's become such a struggle for them to go to school or to even just stay in class.
Mhm.
And then again, with adults, especially women, I see a lot of like women who want to become pregnant and are realizing that this phobia is interfering with their desire to get pregnant. And they're like, I don't want this. And I don't, or they already have children and they're like, I don't want this to impact my parenting. I've got, some clients who see a real big effect on their parenting, not their actual parenting, being a good parent, but they're afraid, what if I'm not able to be there for my kid when they're sick? If my kid's sick, I'm afraid I'm going to be running away. I won't be able to be in the same room. And they know innately they need to be there for their kid. And so that's that value of being a good parent, a supportive parent, is a huge driver for people.
Hmm. So, if somebody comes to you and they clearly have a case of emetophobia, for the benefit of the audience here, what does treatment look like for someone?
Yeah. So I start by, of course, a thorough assessment like I do with any client to really understand the problem they're having and how it fits into the context of their history and their life. And of course, their goals too. Where do they want this to go? What do they want to be able to do? And then we talk a little bit about the treatment options. And most people, I feel like by the time they find me, they've identified they have emetophobia. They've done some research. They know what ERP is. They're kind of ready to go. It's not everybody, but I feel like most people are pretty savvy. They look online and they learn, they self-diagnose, they try to self-learn. And so I'm going in more depth then about what treatment looks like from an exposure standpoint. I won't talk as much about like what ACT is and like a whole formula for that, because I'm really just integrating that with exposure most of the time. Of course, if I'm doing inference-based therapy, then I'm definitely doing more of a discussion around that as well. But my first step before we do any treatment is I'm really letting people know like what I'm going to do, what my plan is to help them get where they want to be. I don't like people to feel like they come into therapy and it's like a mystery of like, what's the therapist going to like help me with and how we're going to do it. I really want them to collaboratively work with me on knowing here's our roadmap and where we're going.
Hmm.
So I tell them about how treatment will work. And so I'll do a lot of education, especially because if it's exposure, I want them to have the buy-in because I can't make them face their fear, but I got to help them have the courage to do it. So we'll do that. We'll set up an exposure menu where we're writing down all the things that they avoid, all the things they're afraid of. And we then look at other creative ways to add in things to face that are in small bite-sized pieces that they can work their way up towards.
Hmm.
So I find that helps a lot of clients with anxiety too. They can feel a little bit more sense of control to know, hey, here's a plan and here's what I get to choose to work on, when they can see that there's a step-by-step process. So that's what I start with. And then I'll often, do some skill work with them around, all right, we're going to give up some of your safety behaviors or your avoidance behaviors. But of course, that's going to create a lot of distress. It's going to be really hard to sit with. I want to teach you a different way to sit with that rather than resorting to escaping. So I'll do some work around that with people. And then we go to work. A lot of the times I'm doing exposure work with my clients in the session. Sometimes I'm just assigning it as homework, but most of the time I'm doing some of it together with them. And we review how they're doing with it week to week. And we just keep working up their plan. And that's kind of typical from an exposure-based perspective.
Okay, so I have to ask the question because I'm sure there's some people watching this who are wondering to themselves. So if I went in for treatment and you're talking about exposure and raising my distress, are you going to actually make me vomit?
Great question. I would never require that. We would never suggest that somebody needs to do that in order to get better. In fact, I think it would be pretty harmful to someone to do it. I do have some clients, once they get to a point of recovery, they are, they've done all the work, they've made significant progress, but here sick season rolls around and the anticipation anxiety is there. And that's the part they're really struggling with. And not only that, but they almost get to a place of, okay, I want it to happen in my house to see how I'm going to handle it differently now. There's almost an excitement about it, but there's a little bit of a dread with it too. But I've made so much progress. I want to see, like, did my work pay off? All that hard work in therapy. Am I going to, be able to do what I'm hoping? I think what's tricky with emetophobia, it's not like people get sick all the time. I mean, sometimes that happens, but it is it is a very unknown situation of when somebody could get sick. And so there's this piece for people that they want to be faced with it after they've gone through treatment to like know, but it wouldn't be healthy to like cause your kids to vomit or yourself to vomit. That's not healthy. So that to answer your question, yeah, we would never make somebody do that. You never have to. But we do face things that might even produce the sensations, or at least the thought or the fear that it could happen, but never deliberately force somebody to make themselves do that.
Great, great. Yeah, I just know that some people were wondering about that. And there's
For sure.
other related question that I'm sure people are having, which is, in your experience, does therapy alone do the trick? Do they need medication? Can medication alone fix it? Do you have any thoughts about that in your own experience?
Yeah. I think medication can be a really great tool. But a lot of my clients choose not to go on medication. They're open to it, but they're like, I want to see if therapy alone can do it. I'm not afraid of the work. I want to do it. I want to see. And they do really well with it. I have other clients who already were on medication before we got started, and they're like, I need some tools, to just progress, or I don't want to be on medication forever. And so I want to learn the tools so that when I decide to, wean off of medication, that I'm in good hands. So I really see it all over the board as far as like what people use, as far if they use medication or not. I'm very flexible with clients. I would never tell them that they have to be on medication, or that they shouldn't be on medication. It's very personal choice, and I'll support that. So, and I've seen it go both ways with people. I've seen it be life-changing, and I've also seen it not be enough.
Yeah, yeah, and that's pretty much my same experience. So thank you for that. So
Yeah.
that's it's really important, because emetophobia itself is something that's practiced by a small number of therapists out there. So it's really interesting to hear from someone who does it a lot, to be able to hear how it goes. But I know that you also said that you focus on people with a fear of flying.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. And this is something that across all anxiety disorders or even OCD can be something that's challenging. So some people can have, just anxiety about flying itself, but a lot of times there is some other bigger anxiety component or OCD that's a part of the fear. I'm very interested and passionate about it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a personal anxiety that I've had in my life, where it created a lot of anxiety for me, not where I fully avoided, but I would try to like look for reasons to not take that trip or things like that, or I experienced a lot of distress while flying. And so it's something I was really passionate about. And then also because my husband happens to be aviation expert, if you will. He was in the Air National Guard as a flight mechanic, also as a flight engineer, and then has a private pilot's license. And so he's been really instrumental in teaching me about flying, right, to help demystify a lot of the scary parts of it that were happening for me. And he's now actually an anxiety and OCD therapist as well. So he's no longer in that field. So we ended up, in our practice, creating a workshop in our community to help people learn more about flying safety, and then also about how to approach anxiety, and learn skills, learn about the things that are getting in their way, like the mistakes that I made. I always share about the mistakes I made that just fueled my fear, didn't actually help me. And so that's been a big part of our practice too. So it's a little bit of a personal interest of mine too, just because it's something that's very relatable. And then it's just kind of cool because my husband can really provide some expertise, which is really calming for people with that fear, if they have the fear about the plane itself. There's many other people who don't fear the plane at all. There's people who fear, having a panic attack on a flight. losing control of themselves, saying something, offensive. There's all kinds of different ways that anxiety and OCD can impact somebody's flying experience that would make them want to just avoid it altogether.
Right. Right. Wow. Well, I would assume there's probably a very small number of people out there that have a partner who's an aviation enthusiast. So,
Right.
so what do you do with the patients that come to you and don't have that connection? Do they have to buy a ticket on a flight and fly with you somewhere? How do you handle that?
That's a great question. So what we've done is we've created a course where, we teach people all about, all the things they need to know, just the basic things they need to know about flying and mechanics of that. Because if they have concerns about the plane itself, then, my husband, his name's Justin, he can kind of help demystify that and help people really trust. And even just kind of resolve any myths or misconceptions they have, because there's a lot of things that, and I can share a personal example, some things that what you think might happen, or even just assumptions we make, are so inaccurate. And that can contribute to the anxiety. Like I used to tell him, when we would fly and we'd start to descend, I'd be like, oh, I'm feeling better now. Like I'm good because I know we're right there. Like we're safe. And he's like, well, actually, Jenny, descending wouldn't, if something were bad to happen, this would not be the safest. Like for me, it felt like the safest because we're just right there. We just coast right down there. And he's like, no, if we're up 30,000 feet, we have way more time to prepare versus when you're lower to the ground. I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And I used to be afraid of the chimes too. I used to think that was secret code of something bad happening. And that's just bizarre, right? They don't want to keep anything from us. They're like, no, if something bad is happening, we're going to let you know because we need you to listen and take action. They're not going to keep anything mysterious happening. So it's just interesting, the things we can make up in our mind about what bad could be happening. So having somebody, be able to explain that's really helpful. So that's kind of his portion. That portion of the flight piece is just kind of helping people understand turbulence and, some basic stuff about aerodynamics and safety and all of that. And then we apply the same process like exposure therapy to it. So we teach about, what keeps a fear and anxiety cycle going, and a lot of the safety behaviors or the avoidance that keeps it going, and helping people see that they can create a roadmap for themselves, kind of like I do in my individual work. Is let's create a roadmap of what you need to do to get on that plane. And yeah, at one point, there's only so much you can do on the ground. At some point, you do have to commit to getting on the plane and letting go of some of the behaviors that are only activating your fear. So we walk people through skills around, their thinking, how to handle, the really intense feelings. But then there's the behavioral work. So we really help people outline that. We would love to go fly with people, but we haven't had that requested yet. So we're gonna kind of wait and see if that's a need that we see. We're right there. We're ready for it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So is the main fear from the patients that you see that something bad is going to happen, like the plane is going to fall out of the sky or crash, or is that just one of the types of fears that they have?
That's just one type.
Okay.
Yep.
And what would be some of the others?
Yeah. So others would be fear of losing control of themselves, doing something where they might have so much anxiety, they lose control and they end up having to be detained or put on a no-fly list. People get really concerned too about being trapped and being unable to escape. And so they get concerned about that. Panic attacks. People with emetophobia struggle with it from the perspective of, what if somebody gets sick or I get sick? I might see that because there's not a lot of places to escape that. Right. Or because of just being in a small confined space, that I could catch a virus more easily, or the motion sickness that I could get just with the sensations as the plane, is what do you call it, taking off or descending. It can create, a lot of weird feelings and sensations. And so some people who have a lot of anxiety sensitivity get really triggered by that.
Mhm.
So it really, people with contamination, OCD, again, kind of similar to with the emetophobia, if they're concerned about getting germs. So any kind of amount of anywhere across the anxiety spectrum or OCD spectrum, I feel like somebody could become afraid of flying.
Right, right. So just out of curiosity, have you ever had a patient who had concerns or fears about airport security or just getting through to the airplane?
That's a good question. Not that I can think of, like while at the airport, you mean?
Yeah, just all of
Mm.
the you can get to certain airports and there's so much activity and so much mayhem, and you're trying to find the gate and you're trying to get through security and you forget to take something out of your pocket and then the thing beeps and you feel like you're a criminal or something.
Right. Yeah, we did have when we did our workshop in the community, we actually take people to the airport, and we have a like mock airplane that we get to use. It's a real airplane that they use for training purposes. So we get to take people through security and then go to the mock airplane. And we have had people say that was so incredibly powerful, because just that process of going through, now that was the fear itself, I suppose it could be for some people, but with some of the people we worked with, it was more of a stressor. And so that was just helpful to get that practice to be able to go through without actually having, a ticket that they had to, or a plane to catch, so they got to go in and practice without that added stress and pressure. So it can be a huge part of it. I think it is a stressor for a lot of people going to the airport. It's a high stimulating environment, lots of noise, people are being shuttled around. TSA is not always very nice. They're usually yelling at people.
Yeah.
So when you have anxiety, it's not very helpful.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Well, that's really great that you have, access to the types of facilities you're describing for people with the fear of flying and, you know, seeing the airplane and going through the process and all that. I'm sure that's very helpful for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a really neat opportunity for us. We were in Bloomington, Minnesota, which is really close to the airport, our major Minneapolis St. Paul airport. So it's just a perfect opportunity for us.
Mhm. Wow, great. So we've talked about emetophobia, we've talked about flying issues. What about other types of OCD? What are some of the more common things that you might see?
Mhm. So other things, just generally in my practice, or specifically with fear of flying.
No, I'm saying OCD wise, if we're not talking about flying, we're not talking about emetophobia, what other
Mhm.
OCD might you see?
Yeah, other presentations. Really common ones that we see are what sometimes people call pure O, where there's, which stands for like purely obsessional, which is not like a diagnosis, but a term that was coined at one point just to help educate people about, hey, OCD looks like somebody who has no outward uh, compulsions, right? A lot of times what we come to know about OCD is somebody's tapping and checking and rearranging things like that. But there are people who experience it just through a mental process. And in fact, they do have compulsions as well. It's just they're mental compulsions. So it's not that they only have the O part of OCD. Their compulsions just happen to also be mental. So we see a lot of that. So people might have like taboo themed obsessions, like a fear of becoming a pedophile, or they question their sexual orientation. They fear that they could harm somebody, be a violent person. And so those can be some common ones that we see in our practice as well.
Mhm. Yeah, those definitely come up quite often. But that's the interesting thing to me about OCD, is that there's so many different presentations, and
Mhm.
there's no definitive list because you can always find another one.
Uh-huh.
The concept is that if somebody is struggling with these obsessive thoughts, this obsessive doubt, and then they're doing some sort of a compulsion, whether it be physical or mental or both, to make themselves feel better, those are some of the sort of red flags that say, well, maybe you should look to see if it's OCD. Um,
For sure.
so, so it sounds like you really do some incredible work in the area, and some very needed work. Where are you licensed to practice? If somebody wanted to reach out to you, who can you help? Where and how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So my practice is located in Minnesota, primarily. I do exclusively virtual work for people in Minnesota, as well as people in South Dakota and Florida. Those are the states I'm also licensed in. We have a physical office in Minnesota that I don't even use anymore, but my husband uses it. So if anybody's in Minnesota and is looking for an in-person approach, I have them work with him.
Hmm. And do you have a website or something if somebody wanted to contact you?
Yeah. So my website is stateofmindtherapy.com. And also have a presence on Instagram, which is also State of Mind Therapy. But there's a dot at the end of each word. State.of.mind.therapy. No dot at the end of that one. And so if anybody has, is looking for some free resources, we do offer a free guide on some of our top tips that we recommend for people with anxiety or OCD, as well as fear of flying. And so we have lots of free resources on our website, and you can find those at stateofmindtherapy.com/guide.
Okay. And you were talking about a course that you're putting together for the fear of flying. Is that something that is available now or coming?
Great question. So we're kind of in a revamp right now. So our previous one is on hold at the moment. There's a option to purchase a recording that we did of it. When we did it virtually, we recorded it. And so that could be available for purchase. But the one that's being revamped is going to be available in January. So definitely, if people are interested and want to be on the wait list for that, definitely reach out to me through our website and make sure to let them know and keep them posted, or follow us on Instagram. We'll be letting people know about that once it becomes available.
Fantastic. Wow. Well, there's been a lot of great information that you've shared today, and important information. And I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to speak with you and to be able to share this with people out there, so that, they can better understand maybe what they might be dealing with, and that it's not something that's never been heard of before. It's something that other people struggle with too, and there are treatments available, and you can work through a lot of these things and get so much better than being just kind of trying to deal with it and white knuckle it. That's never a fun thing to do. So,
Yes. Yes. Thank you for doing this podcast. I think it is so important. Treatment is available and really effective for people who struggle with these kind of issues. And to your point earlier in our conversation, not all therapists are equipped to treat them. And so it's so important to do your research and know, what kind of therapy you need, and then how to seek that out. It can feel really hard um, to know how to find a therapist that fits your needs. It's like, it's not a one size fits all. And so I always offer free consultations for people when they call into our practice, because if I'm not a good fit for them, or if I hear about something they're struggling with and it's not really up my alley for like the approach I have, like I want to give them a name for somebody who is a better fit. I just think um, people don't know when they're looking for a therapist what kind of therapy they need. They think that a therapist kind of should be able to treat all, or they're all helpful, in which most of them should be. But if you're really looking for specific results, you need a therapist trained to give those specific results.
yeah, no, that's definitely a message that I echo all the time. And again, not that the therapists are bad therapists. It's just some are trained in certain things and some are trained in other things. So you just need to find the one who's trained in what you need.
Exactly.
So, well, thank you again for your time, and the resources that you have out there. It sounds like you've got some great resources available on your website. So I encourage anybody listening to this podcast, if you want to check out Jenny's website and check out the resources, it sounds like it'd be something that would be really helpful. So Jenny, thank you. And hopefully you'll get through the holidays with all the different people flying, and help your clients get through all that, and come out smiling on the other end.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This was really great.
Sure. Thank you.